What if I told you that the story of Noah's Ark is a copy? That 1,000 years before the Bible was written, another man from another culture was warned by his God to build a giant boat. He was told to gather his family, and 2 of every animal, to survive a world-ending flood sent by angry gods. This isn't a fringe theory. It isn't speculation. It's a story written in stone, or more accurately, baked into clay tablets, pulled from the sands of modern-day Iraq. Tablets that sat buried and forgotten for millennia. They tell the story of a great flood, an ark and a survivor. But his name wasn't Noah. His name was Utnapishtim, and the man who went searching for him, the man who heard his incredible story firsthand, was the world's first recorded hero. A king so mighty, his epic was the most popular story on Earth for 2,000 years, before vanishing from human memory almost completely. A story that asks the most fundamental human questions. How do we live, knowing that we will die? And what does it take to become a legend? This is the story of that king. His name was Gilgamesh. Our story begins not with a hero, but with a tyrant. In the ancient city of Uruk, the first great city in the history of the world, a metropolis of sun-baked brick walls rising from the Mesopotamian plain. Its king was Gilgamesh. He was not a humble man. He was, as the tablets tell us, 2/3 god and 1/3 man. His mother was a goddess, his father a mortal king. This divine blood gave him a strength and a beauty that no other human could match. He was a giant among men, his ambition as vast as the sky, his will as unbending as bronze. He built the great walls of Uruk, walls so massive that centuries later, people would say they must have been built by giants. He built towering temples, the ziggurats that clawed at the heavens, trying to touch the realm of the gods who were his ancestors. But his greatness was a shadow, a dark, oppressive force that fell upon his own people. Gilgamesh was a king drunk on his own power. The tablets describe him as a wild bull, rampaging through his own city. He took whatever he wanted. He challenged any young man to a fight, beating them into submission simply to prove his superiority. His arrogance knew no bounds. He was restless, a storm of energy with no equal to check him, and he practiced a tradition so cruel, so despised by his people, that it would finally make them cry out to the heavens for help. The rite of the first night. On a wedding day, before a husband could be with his new wife, Gilgamesh would take the bride for himself. He was the king. It was his right. The people of Uruk suffered under his heavy hand. Their sons were bruised and beaten. Their daughters were taken. Their joy was stolen. They looked at the magnificent walls he had built, and saw not a fortress but a cage. And so they prayed. They cried out not to one god but to the entire pantheon. They begged Anu, the god of the heavens, the father of all gods, to do something, to create a force that could finally stand against their unstoppable king. The gods heard their pleas. They convened in their celestial court and agreed. Gilgamesh's arrogance had gone too far. He needed a rival, an equal, a second self who could mirror his strength, temper his rage, and teach him what it meant to be human. So they tasked Aruru, the goddess of creation, with the job. She went to the wilderness, to the untamed steppe outside the city walls. She took a pinch of clay, moistened it with her spit, and molded it in the image of the sky god Anu. She shaped a man not in a womb but from the raw earth itself. She dropped the clay figure into the wilderness, and he was born. His name was Enkidu. Enkidu was the opposite of Gilgamesh. Where Gilgamesh was a product of the city of civilization, Enkidu was a creature of nature. He was a wild man. His body was covered in matted hair. His long uncut locks flowed down his back like a woman's. He knew nothing of people, of cities, of kings. His companions were the animals. He ran with the gazelles, his legs as swift as theirs. He drank from the water holes alongside the wild beasts. He was the guardian of the wilderness. When a hunter laid a trap, Enkidu, with his immense strength, would spring the trap and set the animals free. He was pure, raw, untamed humanity. A trapper, his livelihood ruined by this wild man, became terrified. He went to his father, who gave him a piece of astonishing advice. He told his son to go to the great city of Uruk, to find King Gilgamesh, and to ask him for a woman. Not just any woman. A temple priestess, a woman dedicated to the goddess of love. Her name was Shamhat. The plan was not to kill Enkidu with a spear, but to tame him with something far more powerful, civilization. The trapper did as he was told. He went before Gilgamesh and described the terrifying wild man in the hills. Gilgamesh, ever arrogant and intrigued by the tale of a man who could match his own legendary strength, agreed. He sent the trapper back to the wilderness with Shamhat. For 3 days they waited by the waterhole. On the third day, Enkidu appeared with the herd to drink. When Enkidu saw Shamhat, he was frozen. He had never seen a creature like this. She was not an animal, but she was not like him. The trapper hid, but Shamhat did not. She met the wild man's gaze. And for 6 days and 7 nights she stayed with him. She taught him not just the ways of love, but the ways of humanity. She spoke to him, and he began to understand words. She shared bread with him, a food he had never known, and he learned to eat. She gave him wine, and he learned to drink. Through her, the wildness began to fall away from him. When the 7 nights were over, Enkidu went to return to his herd. But the animals fled from him. The gazelles he once ran with now shied away from his touch. He had changed. He no longer smelled of the earth and the wild, but of a human. He tried to run with them, but his knees felt weak. He had lost his animal speed. He was no longer one of them. He returned to Shamhat, defeated and confused. She looked at him and said, "You are wise now, Enkidu. You have become like a god. Why would you roam the wilderness with beasts? Come with me. I will take you to Uruk, to the city of Gilgamesh, the man whose strength is unparalleled. I will show you a life you have never known." And so Enkidu the wild man agreed. He was clothed. He learned to be a shepherd, protecting the flocks from wolves and lions. But all the while Shamhat told him stories of Uruk, and of its powerful arrogant king Gilgamesh. She told him of the king's cruelty, of his ego, and especially of his practice of taking new brides on their wedding night. This news filled Enkidu with a righteous fury. A sense of justice, newly awakened in his heart, began to burn. He declared that he would go to Uruk. He would challenge this tyrant. He would stand in the doorway of the wedding chamber, and he, Enkidu, would be the one to stop the king. The day he arrived in Uruk, the city was in a frenzy. People crowded around him, marveling at this giant hairy man from the steppe. They saw his raw power, his untamed energy, and they whispered to each other, "He looks like Gilgamesh. Shorter perhaps, but his bones are stronger. He is the one who will challenge our king." That very night, a wedding was to take place. The ceremonial bed was prepared for the king. As Gilgamesh, adorned in his royal finery, made his way to the bride's home, he found his path blocked. Standing in the doorway, his feet planted like the roots of an ancient tree, was Enkidu. The wild man from the hills was denying the king his prize. The crowd fell silent. The air grew thick with tension. For the first time in his life, King Gilgamesh was being told no. He looked at this stranger, this echo of his own strength, and saw not a subject but a challenge. An equal. The 2 men, one born of a goddess, the other born of clay, stared at each other. There were no words. There was only the primal language of power. They lunged. They grappled in the street, a whirlwind of muscle and fury. The tablets say they crashed into each other like bulls. The doorposts of the house shattered. The walls of the city trembled. In the heart of the first city, under the silent gaze of the gods who had set all this in motion, the god king and the wild man began a battle that would not decide a winner, but would forge the greatest friendship the world had ever known, and set them on a path to find the man who survived the end of the world. The 2 titans met in the heart of Uruk, in the market square before the Yana temple. One was dressed in the finest linens of civilization, the other clad only in his own raw power. The city fell silent. This wasn't a king putting down a challenger. This was a force of nature meeting its equal. Gilgamesh, the king who had never been matched, who had grown bored and cruel in his own supremacy, lunged forward. Enkidu, the man who knew the strength of bears and the speed of gazelles, met him head-on. They crashed together with the force of colliding mountains. The ground shook. Stone flagstones cracked under their feet. They grappled, each a perfect mirror of the other's strength. Gilgamesh with the refined, brutal technique of a warrior king. Enkidu with the untamed, unpredictable fury of the wilderness itself. For hours they wrestled, a whirlwind of muscle and will. The people of Uruk watched in awe and terror. They had prayed for someone to temper their king's arrogance, but they never imagined a contest of this magnitude. Gilgamesh was furious. He was 2/3 god. He had built the walls of Uruk with his own hands. No one had ever withstood his charge. Yet this wild man, he would not yield. For every move Gilgamesh made, Enkidu had a counter. For every show of force, Enkidu returned it in kind. But as the hours wore on, something shifted in Gilgamesh. The fury began to fade, replaced by a feeling he hadn't experienced since childhood. Respect. He wasn't fighting a beast. He was fighting his own reflection, staring back at him from the wild. Finally, with a tremendous effort that sent tremors through the square, Gilgamesh managed to force Enkidu to one knee. He had him. The battle was won. But as he looked down at his defeated foe, panting, bleeding, yet with eyes still blazing with defiance, Gilgamesh saw not an enemy to be executed, but a brother to be embraced. He let go. He stepped back. And in that moment the fight was over. Enkidu rose to his feet, and the two men, the king and the wild man, looked at each other. There was no victory speech, no cry of defeat. Instead they embraced. A friendship was forged in that instant, a bond stronger than any bronze or stone. Gilgamesh, the lonely tyrant, had found his equal, and Enkidu, the beast among men, had found his home. The transformation in Gilgamesh was immediate and profound. The cruelty vanished. The arrogance was tempered by camaraderie. With Enkidu by his side, he no longer needed to prove his strength against his own people. He had a companion to share his thoughts, his ambitions, his fears. And a new terrible fear began to creep into the king's heart. For the first time, Gilgamesh had something he could not bear to lose. He had a friend, and he knew with the chilling certainty that haunts all mortals, that one day, death would come for one of them. He was a king. He was part god. But that 1/3 of him that was human, that 1/3 that was mortal, suddenly screamed louder than all the rest. What is the point of building a great city if you will just turn to dust within its walls? What is the point of being a great king if your name is forgotten the moment you die? Gilgamesh became obsessed with a new kind of conquest, a war against oblivion itself. He needed to achieve a feat so legendary, so impossible, that his name and Enkidu's name would be etched into the memory of the world forever. He needed to achieve immortality, not of the body but of the story. One night, he turned to Enkidu. "My friend," he said, "in the heart of a distant land, there is a forest of cedar trees that touch the heavens. It is a sacred, forbidden place, guarded by a terror that no mortal has ever faced and survived. A monster named Humbaba." Enkidu's face went pale. Before the harlot had found him, he had roamed the edges of this very forest. He knew the stories. He knew the fear. "We cannot go there," Enkidu whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. "I have seen the cedar forest. I have heard its guardian, Humbaba. His roar is the flood, his breath is fire, and his jaws are death itself. He can hear a rustling leaf from 100 leagues away. He never sleeps. He was put there by the great god Enlil, the god of earth, wind, and air, to protect the cedars. To go there is to walk into our own graves. Why would you even speak of such a thing?" Gilgamesh's eyes burned with a feverish ambition. "Because that is precisely why we must go. To defeat the undefeatable. To kill the unkillable. We will travel to the cedar forest, we will cut down the tallest cedar, and we will slay Humbaba. When we return, our fame will be absolute. Our names will live forever. No one will ever forget the two heroes who killed Humbaba." "This is madness," Enkidu pleaded. "You do not understand what you are asking. This is not a man you can wrestle in the street. This is a primordial terror, a servant of the greatest of gods. To challenge him is to challenge the gods themselves." But Gilgamesh would not be swayed. He saw the fear in his friend's eyes and mistook it for a weakness he had to burn away. He taunted him, cajoled him, reminded him of their strength together. "Has the wild man of the forest become a coward in the city?" Gilgamesh asked, his words sharp. "Are you afraid to die? We all die. Even the tallest man cannot reach the heavens, and the whitest man cannot cover the earth. Our lives are short. If I die in this quest, at least they will say, 'Gilgamesh fell fighting the ferocious Humbaba.' But if we stay here, what will they say of us? That we grew old and weak behind our own walls? I will not accept that fate, and I will not let you accept it either. We will do this together." Reluctantly, Enkidu agreed. His loyalty to his new brother was stronger than his primal fear. The decision was made. They would challenge the demon of the cedar forest. Their first stop was the forges of Uruk. They commanded the smiths to craft weapons worthy of such a quest. The smiths worked day and night, their hammers ringing with a dreadful purpose. They forged 2 axes of immense size, each weighing over 200 pounds, their blades made of bronze and gold. They cast daggers and greatswords, each a masterpiece of death. The city buzzed with the news, a mixture of pride and dread. With their weapons complete, Gilgamesh and Enkidu went before the elders of Uruk to announce their plan. The old men listened, their faces grim. When Gilgamesh was finished, they spoke with one voice. "You are young, Gilgamesh, and your heart carries you away. You do not know what you are trying to do. We have heard of Humbaba. His voice is a cyclone. No one can withstand his terror. Why must you do this?" Enkidu, his own fear now validated by the wise men, tried one last time. "Listen to them, my friend. Let us abandon this quest." But Gilgamesh only laughed. "I hear their words, but I will not heed their fears." Seeing that the king's mind was set, the elders resigned themselves to fate. They gathered around the 2 heroes to perform the sacred rites. They offered blessings to Shamash, the sun god, the god of justice and journeys, praying he would light their path and protect them. Then, one of the oldest among them took Enkidu's hand. "Enkidu," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "we entrust our king to you. You know the wilderness. You know the dangers. Let him go ahead of you, but guard his back. Protect him. Bring him home to us safely." And so, armed with weapons of legend and draped in the heavy blessings and fears of their city, the 2 friends stood at the great gates of Uruk. Before them lay the long, perilous road to the cedar forest. They were leaving the world of men and laws to enter a world of gods and monsters, on a quest for the one thing no king could ever truly own, a name that would never die. They took their first step into the unknown, walking towards a showdown with a demon whose divine master was the very god who held the power of the flood in his hands. Their journey was not one of days, but of weeks. 6 days and 6 nights, they walked, a relentless march across 150 leagues of unforgiving land. They ate only once a day, pushing their bodies past the limits of mortal men. The world Gilgamesh had known, the brick-and-mortar certainty of his city, melted away, replaced by an endless horizon of dust and rock. With every step, he was shedding the king and becoming the hero. And with every step, Enkidu, the wild man, felt a growing dread, a cold stone in the pit of his stomach. He knew the wilderness. He knew its silence, and he knew its screams. And the silence ahead was screaming. They reached the edge of the great cedar forest, a wall of green so vast and ancient it seemed to touch the sky. The air grew cool, thick with the scent of resin and damp earth. This was a place outside of human time, a sanctuary of the gods, guarded by their most terrifying servant. As they stood at the threshold, a profound weariness fell upon them. It was here, at the foot of the Green Mountain, that the nightmares began. Each night Gilgamesh would fall into a violent, prophetic sleep, and each morning, Enkidu would have to interpret the terror. The first dream, a mountain collapsed upon them, trapping them like ants in a landslide. Gilgamesh, ever the optimist, ever the man bending fate to his will, declared it a good omen. "The mountain," he said, "is Humbaba. We will make him fall. We will crush him." Enkidu, his face pale in the pre-dawn light, wasn't so sure. He saw only destruction. The second dream, a wild bull, bellowing with rage, gored Gilgamesh, splitting the very earth beneath him. Yet in the dream a mysterious figure appeared, offering Gilgamesh water and pulling him from the dust. "This is also a good omen," Gilgamesh proclaimed. "The bull is not Humbaba. It is the great god Shamash, our patron. He will fight for us." Enkidu saw only the goring, the fury, the taste of his own blood in his mouth. The third dream was the worst. The skies shattered, lightning struck, and the world was consumed by fire. Everything turned to ash, and then a rain of death fell from the heavens. Gilgamesh woke trembling, the vision so stark, so absolute, that even his iron will was shaken. For the first time he felt a sliver of fear. But Enkidu, looking at his friend, his king, found a strange strength. He had been the voice of doubt, but now he saw that Gilgamesh needed him. He lied. "My friend," Enkidu said, his voice steady, "the dream is a blessing. The fire is Humbaba. The rain of death is the victory we will rain down upon him." It was a lie born of love, a desperate attempt to shore up the courage of a man who was 2/3 god, but 1/3 terrified mortal. They entered the forest. The light of the sun, their protector Shamash, was instantly devoured by the canopy. A deep resonant humming filled the air. A sound that felt less like it was heard and more like it was felt in their bones. This was the domain of Humbaba. The trees were so colossal they made the ziggurats of Uruk look like children's toys. This was a cathedral built by nature for a god of terror. And then they saw him. Or rather, they felt his presence. Humbaba was not merely a beast. He was a living embodiment of divine wrath. A warden appointed by the god Enlil himself. He wore 7 layers of terrifying radiance, 7 auras of power that were a weapon in themselves. The first aura washed over them like a wave of pure dread, sapping the strength from their limbs. The second was an aura of confusion, making the forest twist and turn, every path leading back to the center of the nightmare. The third was an aura of despair. Gilgamesh, the mighty king, found his axe feeling impossibly heavy. Enkidu, the man who wrestled with lions, felt his knees buckle. They were losing the battle before a single blow was struck. This was not a physical fight. It was an assault on the soul. Humbaba's voice boomed through the trees, not as words, but as the sound of 1,000 falling timbers, of a flash flood tearing through a canyon. "Who are you?" the voice thundered. "To trespass in my sacred wood? You are insects come to be crushed." Seeing his friend falter, Gilgamesh cried out to the heavens, his voice cracking with desperation. "Great Shamash, you promised me glory. You promised me a name that would live forever. Do not abandon me now." And the sun god answered. From the heavens 13 great winds descended into the forest, a divine hurricane summoned to aid the heroes. The wind of the north, the wind of the south, whirlwinds, dust storms, freezing gales, they all converged on Humbaba. They tore at his 7 auras, ripping them from him like layers of clothing. For the first time the demon was blinded, staggered, his divine protection shredded. This was their chance. Gilgamesh and Enkidu charged. The clash was titanic. Gilgamesh swung his massive axe, the might of heroes, while Enkidu wielded his own, a weapon forged for this very purpose. They were a whirlwind of bronze and muscle, a perfect synthesis of civilization's strength and nature's fury. They fought with the desperation of men who knew this was their one and only shot at immortality. They struck him at the neck. The great demon, the guardian of the cedar forest, the terror appointed by Enlil, crashed to the ground. The entire forest shook as if a mountain had, in fact, fallen. He was defeated, but he was not dead. Humbaba looked up at Gilgamesh, and the rage in his eyes was replaced by something shockingly human. Fear. Tears streamed from his eyes, carving paths through the grime on his monstrous face. "Gilgamesh," he wept, his voice no longer a thunderclap but a broken whisper. "I was only doing my duty. Enlil, the great god, placed me here. He commanded me to guard this forest. Have mercy. Let me be your servant. I will cut the sacred cedars for you myself. I will build you a palace that will make the gods envious." Gilgamesh hesitated. He looked at the fallen behemoth, a creature of immense power now reduced to begging. His heart, the heart of a king, was moved. To spare this creature, that would be a story of its own, a testament not just to his strength but to his mercy. He was a king, not a butcher. He looked to his friend, his brother Enkidu, expecting to see the same compassion reflected in his eyes. But Enkidu's face was a mask of cold fury. "Do not listen to him," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Do not trust him. A trapped wolf will promise you anything, but the moment you turn your back, its teeth will be in your throat. If we let him live, his master Enlil will hear of it. And Enlil's wrath is 1,000 times greater than Humbaba's. He will hunt us to the ends of the earth. Finish it. Now, before the gods can intervene." It was the ultimate paradox. Gilgamesh, the tyrant king, was tempted by mercy. Enkidu, the gentle man of the wild, was demanding blood. Humbaba watched them, his life hanging on their debate. He saw the shift in Gilgamesh's eyes as Enkidu's cold logic took hold. "You have turned my own servant against me," Humbaba cried out to Enkidu. "And for this you will be cursed. Of the two of you, you will not live to see old age. Your life will be filled with grief." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Prophecy. A curse. Enkidu ignored it. "Strike, my friend," he urged Gilgamesh. "Secure our fame forever." Gilgamesh raised his axe. The sun glinted off the polished bronze. He looked down at the pleading demon, then at his determined brother. He had come here for a name that would never die, and mercy, he realized, is often forgotten. But a monster slain, that is a story told for eternity. He brought the axe down, a final definitive blow, and in the sudden ringing silence that followed, a silence that seemed to swallow all sound in the ancient forest, they both felt it, a cold wave washing over them. It wasn't the wind, it was the attention of a distant, powerful, and now deeply offended god. They had won their great victory. They had defied a god and killed his servant. But in doing so, they had just set in motion a tragedy from which neither of them would ever escape. In the halls of heaven, the great gods were in an uproar. Anu, the father of the sky, Enlil, the warrior god of earth and wind, and Shamash, the glorious sun, held a council. The air crackled with divine fury. Enlil, his voice like the rumbling of a coming storm, spoke first. They have gone too far. They have slain Humbaba, the guardian I placed in the cedar forest. And as if that insult were not enough, they have slaughtered the bull of heaven, a creature of the gods themselves. This cannot stand. The arrogance of these mortals must be punished. Anu, the sky father, agreed. The bull of heaven was my creation. Its death is an affront. One of them must die. But which one? The question hung in the celestial air. It was Shamash, the sun god, who had aided the heroes, who spoke in their defense. Was it not by my command that they killed the bull of heaven? He was a terror upon the land of Uruk. And Humbaba, the fierce one, did he not threaten them? Must the innocent one, Enkidu, die for this? But Enlil's rage was a fire that could not be quenched. He turned on Shamash, his eyes burning. You went down to them daily. You walked among them as one of their own. It is because of your help that they have grown so bold. Enlil's judgment was final. Gilgamesh is a king. He is 2/3 god. He cannot be touched so easily. But Enkidu, the wild man, the one made from clay, he shall be the price. Enkidu must die. The verdict of the gods did not come as a thunderclap or a divine decree from on high. It came as messages from the gods so often did, in the quiet darkness of the night. It crept into the mind of Enkidu as a dream. He saw the great gods in their council. He heard their arguments, he heard Shamash speak for him, and he heard Enlil's final terrible judgment. He awoke in a cold sweat, his heart a stone in his chest, and turned to Gilgamesh. My brother, my friend, listen to the dream I had last night. The great gods were in council, and they have passed a sentence. Not on you but on me. He recounted the vision, the words of the gods echoing in the still morning air of the palace. Gilgamesh listened, and tears welled in his eyes. My brother, he cried, why do they blame you for what we both have done? Why must you be the one to pay? A bitter, venomous rage began to boil in Enkidu's soul. This was his reward for becoming human? For leaving the wilderness and embracing civilization? His anger needed a target, and he found one. He turned his face toward the great cedar gate of Uruk, the very gate he and Gilgamesh had fashioned from the tallest tree in the cedar forest, a monument to their victory. He spoke to it as if it were a living thing. O gate of wood, you have no understanding. I sought the finest tree for you. I traveled 200 hours to find you. If I had known this would be your purpose, a monument leading to my doom, I would have taken up an axe and smashed you to splinters. I would have made your frame a coffin. His fury was not spent. He thought back to the beginning of his journey. He cursed the trapper, the hunter who first laid eyes on him at the watering hole. May his profits be small. May the beasts he hunts escape his pits. May his heart be filled with sorrow. And then, he turned his wrath upon the one who had truly changed him, Shamhat, the temple priestess who had tamed him with her grace, who taught him to eat bread and drink wine, who clothed him in fine robes and led him to his greatest friend Gilgamesh. To her, he saved his most potent venom. Come, Shamhat, I will decree your fate. May you never have a home to call your own. May you live in the shadow of the city wall. May the drunkard and the outcast be your only companions, and may they strike your cheek when you are at your most beautiful. May you be cast aside, for you took me from the wild, where I was innocent, and brought me here to die. He spat the curse, his body trembling with grief and injustice. But as the final bitter words left his lips, a voice called down from the heavens. It was Shamash, the sun god, his light breaking through the clouds. Enkidu, why do you curse the priestess Shamhat? Was it not she who gave you bread fit for a god, and wine fit for a king? Was it not she who clothed you in splendor, and gave you the mighty Gilgamesh for your companion? And now Gilgamesh, your beloved friend, will he not lay you to rest in a royal tomb? Will he not have the people of Uruk, the elders and the young, weep for you? And when you are gone, will he not let his own body grow filthy, mat his hair, and roam the wild plains in grief for you, wearing the skin of a lion? The god's words were not a command, but a simple piercing truth. Enkidu listened, and the fire of his rage cooled into the ash of sorrowful understanding. He looked up at the sky, his heart aching. Everything Shamash said was true. He had known friendship. He had known love. He had known honor. He had lived more in his short time with Gilgamesh than in all his years among the gazelles. His anger subsided, replaced by a profound regret. He lifted his head and spoke again, his voice now quiet, filled with remorse. He took back his curse upon Shamhat, and in its place, he gave her a blessing. May the kings and princes love you. May the soldier undo his belt for you, and give you honey and jewels. May the priest make way for you, and may you be showered with gifts. For me you showed the greatest gift of all, a friend. And with that, the divine sentence began. Enkidu fell ill. This was no common sickness, no fever that could be broken with cool water, no wound that could be bound and healed. This was a sickness sent by the gods. It was a slow creeping decay, a fire in his veins that no earthly medicine could quench. For 12 long days he withered. And Gilgamesh, the mighty king, the slayer of Humbaba and the bull of heaven, could do nothing. For the first time in his life he was utterly, completely helpless. He who could wrestle lions and topple giants could not fight this invisible enemy. He sat by Enkidu's bedside, a titan reduced to a powerless spectator. He watched his friend, his other self, waste away. He saw the strength drain from his limbs, the light fade from his eyes. He prayed. He pleaded with the gods, with Anu, with Enlil, with Shamash. But the heavens were silent. His words were dust in the wind. He saw in Enkidu's suffering not just the loss of his friend, but a terrifying preview of something he had never truly considered: his own mortality. This invincible hero, this demigod, was forced to watch as the one person who was his equal was unmade, piece by agonizing piece. On the final night, Enkidu stirred. He told Gilgamesh of one last dream. It was a vision of the afterlife, the Mesopotamian underworld. He described a terrifying figure, a being with the hands of an eagle and the claws of a lion, who seized him and dragged him down to the house of dust, the land of no return, a place where darkness is their food, and clay is their nourishment, where they see no light, and live in blackness, where the kings of the earth, who once wore crowns, are now nothing more than servants, fetching baked meats for the gods of the underworld. It was a bleak, hopeless vision of an eternity in the gray, silent dust. After telling his dream, Enkidu lay back, his breathing shallow. He looked at Gilgamesh, his brother, one last time. And then, as the first light of the 13th day touched the horizon, he was gone. The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than any mountain. Gilgamesh stood frozen, staring at the still form of his friend. He touched Enkidu's chest, hoping to feel a heartbeat. He felt nothing. He covered his friend's face with a veil like a bride. And then a sound escaped his lips. It was not a cry of a king, or a roar of a warrior. It was a primal, broken howl of pure loss. He began to pace the room like a caged lioness who has lost her cubs, tearing at his hair, ripping his fine royal robes to shreds. His other half was gone, the wild man who had become his soul. But in that crushing, all-consuming grief, a new and even more terrible feeling began to take root, a cold, sharp, paralyzing terror. He looked at the lifeless body of Enkidu, the strongest man he had ever known, and he saw not just his friend but a mirror, a reflection of his own inevitable fate. The question burned itself into his mind, searing away everything else. If Enkidu can die, then so can I. And so Gilgamesh, the king who had conquered gods and monsters, was finally conquered himself. Not by a weapon but by a realization. A truth so cold and absolute it froze the very marrow in his bones. He did not let them take Enkidu's body. For 7 days and 7 nights, he sat with his friend, weeping, roaring at the gods, pleading with the silent corpse. He watched, waiting for a sign, a twitch, a breath. He touched Enkidu's chest, hoping to feel a heartbeat. but there was only the stillness of stone. He refused to believe it. He told himself his friend was merely sleeping, that the power of his own grief, the sheer force of his royal will, would be enough to call him back. But on the seventh day, the finality of it all became undeniable. A worm, a small insignificant maggot, fell from his friend's nostril, and in that tiny grotesque moment the spell was broken. This was not sleep. This was decay. This was the humiliating, unceremonious end that awaited all flesh. Enkidu, the wild man who ran with gazelles and possessed the strength of the heavens, was now just meat for worms. Gilgamesh finally allowed the funeral to begin, but it would be no ordinary funeral. It would be a monument to his grief, a spectacle so grand the gods themselves would take notice. He summoned the artisans of Uruk, the stonecutters, the goldsmiths, the jewelers. He commissioned a statue of Enkidu, not of simple clay or wood, but of shining gold, with a breast of lapis lazuli and a body of the most precious stones. He tore at his own royal robes and matted his perfect hair with dust. He offered treasures to the underworld, to the ferrymen of the river of the dead, to the dark queen Ereshkigal herself, begging them to treat his friend with honor. He made offerings to every god he could name, trying to buy his friend a peaceful eternity. The entire city of Uruk mourned. They wept for the hero who had helped slay the bull of heaven. But as Gilgamesh stood before the pyre, watching the flames consume what was left of his other half, he felt no comfort. The grand statue, the piles of gold, the public displays of sorrow, they were all meaningless. They were decorations on a tomb. They couldn't change the fundamental, terrifying fact: Enkidu was gone forever. And that same nothingness was waiting for him. After the days of mourning were over, a new kind of silence fell over the palace. It was the silence of Gilgamesh's own mind, which had become a prison of fear. He would walk the halls of his great ziggurat, the monument to his power, and see only his future tomb. He would look at his own hands, the hands that had wrestled lions, and see only bones and dust. The fear of death became a physical thing, a sickness in his gut, a constant buzzing in his ears. He couldn't sleep. When he did, he was haunted by nightmares of the underworld, a house of dust where the dead sit in darkness, eating clay and wearing feathers like birds. He looked in the mirror and no longer saw a king. He saw a dead man walking. 2/3 God, yes, but that meant 1/3 mortal, 1/3 vulnerable, 1/3 doomed. And that 1/3 was enough to poison everything. What was the point of his strength? What was the point of his fame? What good was it to have his name carved on every brick in Uruk if one day he wouldn't be there to read it? A legacy was just a ghost's memory. A desperate, wild idea began to form in the furnace of his terror. A legend, a myth whispered by old priests. The story of a man, an ancestor, named Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim the Faraway. He was the only human to ever escape death's grasp. Ages ago, the gods had grown angry with humanity and sent a great flood to wipe the slate clean, to wash away all life from the face of the earth. But Utnapishtim, through his wisdom and piety, was warned. He built a great ship, an ark, and saved his family, along with the seed of all living things. As a reward for surviving the apocalypse, the gods had granted him and his wife the one thing no other mortal possessed: eternal life. They had placed him at the very edge of the world, at the mouth of the rivers, to live forever. If Utnapishtim had found the secret, then so could Gilgamesh. This became his new quest. Not for glory, not for fame, but for life itself. He abandoned everything. He cast off his crown and his fine linen robes. He let his hair grow long and matted. He dressed himself in the rough, stinking skin of a lion, a grotesque parody of his former triumphs. He left the city of Uruk, the testament to his greatness, and walked out into the wilderness alone. The people watched their king go, not with a scepter in his hand, but with the wild look of a hunted animal in his eyes. He had become what Enkidu once was, a man of the wild driven by a primal need. His journey was not a king's procession. It was a desperate scramble through desolate lands. He ate what he could catch and slept where he fell. One night, in a mountain pass, he came upon a pride of lions, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. The old Gilgamesh would have fought them for sport, for the thrill of it, to prove his strength. But this Gilgamesh fought with a new kind of fury. He fought not for glory but out of sheer terror. He was fighting his own mortality, personified in the claws and teeth of the beasts. He slaughtered them not with joy but with a grim, desperate need to simply not die. Not here. Not like this. He journeyed for uncounted weeks, across scorched plains and through treacherous mountains, guided only by the legend of Utnapishtim. Finally, he came to the end of the mortal world. Before him rose the twin peaks of Mount Mashu, two impossible mountains that reached into the heavens and whose foundations were rooted in the underworld itself. It was said that these mountains guarded the path of the sun. Every morning, the sun would rise from a gate between the peaks, and every evening, it would set through another. No mortal had ever passed these gates. Guarding the entrance was a creature beyond any nightmare. A scorpion man and his mate, beings of terrifying majesty. Their upper bodies were human, but their lower bodies were the coiled, venomous tails of giant scorpions. Their glance was death. Their aura was so powerful, so filled with divine terror, that the mountains themselves seemed to tremble before them. The old Gilgamesh would have challenged them, but the new Gilgamesh, the humbled, terrified Gilgamesh, fell to his knees. He shielded his face from their awesome, deadly gaze. The scorpion man spoke, his voice like the grinding of rock. "Who are you, who dares to come to the gates of Mashu? Your body is of mortal flesh, yet you carry the spark of the gods within you." Trembling, Gilgamesh found his voice. He told them his name and his story. He spoke of Enkidu, of his unbearable grief, and of the gnawing fear of death that had driven him to the ends of the earth. He told them of his quest to find Utnapishtim, his ancestor, to ask him the one question that mattered. "How do I escape the darkness?" The scorpion beings looked at each other. The female spoke to her mate. "He who comes to us, his body is worn with despair, and his spirit is scorched by grief." The scorpion man turned his devastating gaze back to Gilgamesh. "The path you seek is impossible, son of Uruk. No mortal has ever made the journey. Beyond this gate lies the path of the sun, a tunnel of 12 long leagues that runs through the heart of the earth. It is a path of absolute, suffocating darkness. No light has ever touched its depths. You will see nothing. You will be utterly alone. You will go mad long before you find the other side." But Gilgamesh did not waver. He looked up, the desperation in his eyes burning brighter than any fear. "I must go," he pleaded. "Even if I must crawl on my hands and knees through sorrow and pain, I will go. Open the gate for me." The scorpion man stared at the broken king for a long moment. He saw not arrogance but pure, unadulterated desperation. He saw a man so terrified of the end that he was willing to walk through hell itself for a sliver of hope. With a sound like the world splitting in two, the scorpion man turned to the massive stone gate. "Go then, Gilgamesh," he boomed. "May the path be open to you. But be warned, once you enter, there is no turning back. You must cross all 12 leagues before the sun follows you on its nightly journey. If it catches you within the mountain, you will be burned to ash." The great gate of Mashu swung inward, revealing not a path, but an entrance to nothing. It was a solid wall of blackness, a void, a darkness so profound, so ancient and complete, it seemed to be a living entity, a hungry mouth waiting to swallow the world. It was the color of the universe before the first star was born, the color of the grave. Gilgamesh stood at the threshold between the world of light and the world of eternal night. Everything he was, everything he had ever known was behind him. Ahead was the impossible. He took a breath, the cold air of the tunnel stinging his lungs. He looked into the abyss, a darkness so absolute it seemed to drink the very light from the sky behind him. And then he stepped inside. The darkness was not an absence of light. It was a presence, a physical weight that pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating, like being buried alive in cold, wet earth. The air was stale, ancient, carrying the dust of millennia. For the first few steps, Gilgamesh held his hand out, expecting to feel a wall, some guide to tell him he was still moving forward. But he touched nothing. There was only the void. His footsteps, which had echoed with such confidence on the mountain pass, were now swallowed by the immense, silent emptiness. The only sound was the frantic drumming of his own heart and the ragged rasp of his own breath. He was a king, a demigod. He had wrestled the bull of heaven and slain the demon Humbaba. But in here, in this absolute black, he was nothing. He was just a man blind and terrified. He tried to count his steps, to impose some order on the chaos, but the numbers blurred and vanished in his mind. Time itself seemed to unravel. Was it minutes? Hours? Days? He had no way of knowing. The sun, the moon, the stars, the fundamental rhythms of the world he knew were gone. He was in a place outside of time, a corridor between the living and the dead. After what felt like an eternity, a strange wind began to blow. It didn't come from behind him or in front of him. It seemed to rise from the very floor. A cold, piercing gale that cut through his lion skin cloak and chilled him to the bone. It carried no scent, no sound, just a relentless pressing force. The epic calls this journey a race against the sun. The scorpion beings had warned him that the sun travels through this tunnel at night, and if he were caught in its path, he would be incinerated by its divine fire. He had to cross the entire 12 leagues of darkness before sunrise. So he pushed on, leaning into the wind, his muscles screaming in protest. The darkness deepened, if such a thing were even possible. It became textured. He could almost feel it brushing against his skin, a velvet shroud trying to pull him down into a sleep from which he would never wake. His mind, starved of all sensation, began to play tricks on him. He saw flashes of Enkidu, not as the powerful companion he had loved, but as a pale, dust-covered shade in the underworld, reaching out a translucent hand. He heard the whispers of his own people in Uruk, calling him a fool, a madman who had abandoned his throne to chase a ghost. Doubt became his companion in the dark. It was a cold, insidious voice that told him this was all for nothing, that Utnapishtim was just a myth, a fairy tale, that immortality was a lie sold to frighten children, that he would die here, alone, in this forgotten passage at the edge of the world, and no one would ever know his fate. His body would turn to dust, and the great Gilgamesh would be just another forgotten name whispered on the wind. He stumbled, his knee cracking against the unseen floor. Pain shot up his leg, hot and sharp. He lay there, the crushing weight of the darkness and his own despair pressing down on him. This was it. The end. It was easier to just lie here, to give up, to let the darkness take him. But then something else sparked within him. A flicker of defiance. The memory of Enkidu's face, not as a shade, but as he was in life, laughing, fighting, living with a ferocious joy. Gilgamesh had promised him. He had promised that his death would not be in vain, that he would find the answer. Grief, he realized, was a kind of fuel, and his grief was an inferno. He pushed himself up, his hands raw, his body aching. He screamed into the void, a raw, animalistic roar of pain and rage and defiance. The sound didn't echo. It was simply devoured by the silence. But it didn't matter. The scream was for him. He was still here. He was still fighting. He walked on. The wind howled, a physical assault now, trying to tear him apart. He shielded his face with his arm and kept moving, one agonizing step after another. He was no longer thinking, just moving. A machine made of grief and will. And then he saw it. First, he thought it was another hallucination. A tiny pinprick of something. It wasn't light, not yet. It was more like a memory of light. A subtle shift in the oppressive black. He stopped, his heart hammering against his ribs. Was it real? He blinked, but in the total darkness, blinking meant nothing. He stared at the spot and it was still there. A faint, distant promise. He began to run. He stumbled and fell, picked himself up and ran again. He was a wild man, ragged and desperate, chasing that tiny speck of hope. The speck grew slowly, painfully. It became a sliver, then a crack, then a sliver of brilliant, impossible blue. The wind began to change, losing its biting cold, carrying with it a scent he couldn't place. A scent of blossoms and strange, sweet fruit. He burst out of the tunnel, collapsing onto soft, green grass, and was immediately blinded. The light was overwhelming, a physical blow. It was more intense than any sunlight he had ever known. He covered his eyes, groaning as they burned, tears streaming down his face. For long moments he just lay there, breathing in the sweet, clean air, feeling the warmth on his skin. He had made it. He had walked through the throat of the world and come out the other side. When he could finally open his eyes, the world he saw was one that no mortal had ever laid eyes on. He was in a garden, but the trees were not made of wood. Their trunks were silver, their branches gold. Instead of leaves, they were adorned with gemstones that glittered and chimed in the gentle breeze. He saw trees bearing fruit of polished carnelian, glowing with a soft internal light. He saw vines heavy with clusters of deep blue lapis lazuli, and thorns made of hematite that shimmered like black pearls. The ground was a carpet of semi-precious stones, and a river of what looked like liquid moonlight flowed gently through the grove. This was the Garden of the Gods, a place of perfect, sterile, and inhuman beauty. It was breathtaking, but it was also profoundly alienating. This was not a place for mortals. He, with his torn cloak, his matted hair, and his dirt-streaked face, was a stain on this perfect landscape. At the edge of the garden, by a sea that sparkled with the light of 1,000 sunsets, stood a small tavern, and in the doorway stood a woman. She was veiled, but he could sense her divinity. This was Siduri, the alewife of the gods, the keeper of the tavern at the end of the world. She saw him, this wild, haggard creature emerging from the darkness, and her eyes widened in fear. She quickly barred the door to her tavern, seeing not a king, but a desperate, dangerous man. A madman. Gilgamesh staggered towards her, his legs weak. He had crossed the impossible tunnel. He had survived the darkness. But now he faced a new obstacle. A locked door. He raised a hand, not in threat but in supplication. He had to make her understand. "Tavern keeper," he called out, his voice hoarse from disuse and his desperate scream in the dark. "Why do you bar your gate against me? Why do you lock your door? If I must, I will smash your lock and shatter your bolt. Let me in." She didn't answer, her fear a palpable aura. He saw his reflection in the polished wood of the door. A gaunt, haunted face with eyes that had seen too much darkness. He barely recognized himself. He softened his voice, the arrogance of the king replaced by the desperation of a grieving man. "I am Gilgamesh," he said, his voice cracking. "I have killed bears and lions. I have conquered the wild lands. But my friend, my brother, whom I loved, has died. He has become dust. And I am afraid. I am terrified that I will lie down and never rise again. This is why I have journeyed here. I seek my ancestor Utnapishtim, the one they call the Faraway. They say he found the secret. He knows the secret of life and death. Please tell me, where can I find him?" The alewife, the keeper of the tavern at the edge of the world, looked at the haggard king before her. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the wild grief that had driven him across the earth. And she spoke, her voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside of Gilgamesh. "Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? The life that you seek you will never find. When the gods created mankind, they allotted death to mankind, but life they retained in their own keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full. Be happy day and night. Make every day a festival of joy. Day and night dance and play. Let your clothes be clean. Let your head be washed and bathe yourself in water. Look upon the little one who holds your hand. Let your wife delight in your embrace. For this is the task of mankind." It was a beautiful vision, a simple life, a good life, the life he had once known before Enkidu. But the words were like ash in his mouth. He couldn't go back. The specter of death, the image of his friend turning to clay, had poisoned everything. He looked at Siduri, his resolve hardening. "Alewife," he said, his voice a low growl. "All of that is meaningless if I must die. I will not accept it. You tell me the road to Utnapishtim is impossible, but I have crossed the mountains. I have wrestled lions and worn their skins. I have traveled through the tunnel of the sun. Now tell me, which is the way to Utnapishtim? What are the signs? Give me the signs. If it is a sea, I will cross it. If it is not, I will roam the wilderness some more." Siduri saw that his mind was made up. She sighed, a quiet breath of resignation. "Gilgamesh, there has never been a crossing. No one from the beginning of days has ever crossed that sea. The one who crosses the sea is Shamash, the sun god. After him, who can cross? The crossing is difficult, the way is treacherous, and in between are the waters of death, whose touch is annihilation. Where, Gilgamesh, will you cross the sea? But there is one, Urshanabi. He is the ferryman of Utnapishtim. With him are the stone things, the sacred stones that protect him from the waters of death. He is in the forest now, perhaps chipping a new ore. Go, let him see your face. If it is possible to cross, you will cross with him. If it is not possible, then you will turn back." Gilgamesh heard only one thing, a name, Urshanabi, a way forward. He didn't wait for another word. He raised his axe and his dagger, his mind a tempest of rage and impatience, and he plunged into the forest. He was a storm of a man, crashing through the undergrowth, his eyes scanning for the ferryman, and then he saw them. Not the man but strange stone effigies standing in a clearing. They were carved, ancient, and radiated a strange power. The stone things. In his blind fury, believing them to be guardians or monsters barring his path, Gilgamesh let out a roar. He fell upon them with his axe, shattering the sacred stones into 1,000 pieces, destroying the very things that could have guaranteed his passage. Moments later, a man emerged from the trees, staring in disbelief at the destruction. It was Urshanabi, the ferryman. He looked from the rubble of the stones to the wild-eyed king, axe in hand. "Who are you?" Urshanabi demanded. "Who are you who comes to my shore with such madness? Why is your face so wasted, your features so gaunt and filled with woe?" "I am Gilgamesh," he bellowed. "I am the king of Uruk. My friend, my brother whom I loved, is dead. He has turned to clay, and I am afraid. I am terrified that I too will lie down and never rise again. And so I have come to find my ancestor, Utnapishtim the faraway. I was told you could take me to him." Urshanabi looked at the shattered stones on the ground, then back at Gilgamesh, a look of grim irony on his face. "Your own hands, Gilgamesh, have prevented your crossing. You have smashed the stone things. You have destroyed the very charms that allowed me to ferry passengers across the waters of death. Without them, the journey is impossible." The blood drained from Gilgamesh's face. In his haste, in his rage, he had sabotaged himself. He had come all this way only to fail at the final hurdle because of his own foolishness. He fell to his knees, the last of his strength leaving him. But Urshanabi, looking at the broken king, saw not just a fool, but a man of incredible power and will. An idea formed. "There is perhaps one way," the ferryman said slowly. "Get up, Gilgamesh. Take your axe, go into the forest, and cut down 120 poles. Make them 60 cubits long. Then coat them with bitumen and bring them to me." It was a Herculean task. 120 massive poles, each nearly 100 feet long. But it was a chance. Gilgamesh didn't question it. He seized his axe, and for days on end, the forest echoed with the sound of his chopping. He worked until his hands were raw, his muscles screaming, his royal body becoming that of a common laborer. He felled the mighty trees, stripped them, and dragged the colossal poles back to the shore. When the task was done, he and Urshanabi loaded them onto the ferry, a strange-looking mager boat. They pushed off from the shore, and soon, the familiar waters of the sea began to change. They grew dark, still, and unnaturally cold. They had reached the waters of death. "Now, Gilgamesh," Urshanabi commanded, "take a pole. Push us forward. But be warned. Do not let your hand touch the water. The moment the pole touches the water, it is tainted. You must discard it immediately and take another." This was the reason for the 120 poles. Each push required a new pole. Gilgamesh took the first pole, planted it in the deathly silent water, and shoved. The boat glided forward. He immediately dropped the pole, which seemed to dissolve where it touched the surface. He grabbed a second pole. He pushed again, and again, and again. One by one, he used the poles, his immense strength propelling them across the fatal sea. 20 poles, 50 poles, 100 poles. The shore was still a distant line on the horizon. He used the 110th pole, the 115th, the 120th. He pushed for the last time and let the final pole fall away into the black water. They were still adrift. Not yet there. The shore was agonizingly close, but they were now dead in the water, surrounded by death itself. Urshanabi could do nothing. To touch the water with his oar would mean his end. It was over. But Gilgamesh would not be denied. Not now. Not after everything. He began to strip off his clothes, tearing the fine fabrics and animal skins from his body. Then, standing tall and defiant in the boat, a naked king at the end of the world, he held the tattered garments up against his body, fashioning a makeshift sail from his own coverings. He used his own body as the mast. The faint wind caught in the cloth, and the boat began to move inch by painful inch toward the distant shore. Exhausted, broken, and naked, Gilgamesh finally felt the boat scrape against sand. He stumbled onto the land, collapsing onto the beach. As his vision cleared, He saw a figure standing by the water's edge, watching him. The man was old, but his eyes were clear. He looked at Gilgamesh, at his gaunt face, his wasted frame, his raw and bleeding hands. Utnapishtim the faraway looked upon his descendant and spoke for the first time. His voice was not one of welcome, but of weary confusion. Why is there this rage in your heart? Why have you come all this way, with your face so weathered and your body so spent? Tell me, Gilgamesh, why are you chasing the wind? Gilgamesh looked at the ancient man, the survivor, the immortal, and for the first time on his long journey, his kingly bravado was gone. All that was left was the raw, aching grief of a man who had lost everything that mattered. He spoke, his voice cracking from the dust of the road and the salt of his own tears. How could there not be rage in my heart? How could I not chase the wind? My friend, the brother I loved, the wild man who ran with the gazelles and stood with me against gods and monsters, he is gone. Enkidu, my brother, is clay. The fate of all mankind has caught up to him, and I laid him to rest. But when I did, a fear like I have never known seized me. I looked at his still face and I saw my own. I saw my own end. The great Gilgamesh, two-thirds god, lord of Uruk, will one day be nothing but dust and silence, just like him. And so I started to run. I ran from the city, I ran from the palaces, I ran from my own shadow. I crossed the mountains, I fought the scorpion men. I walked through the tunnel of utter darkness. I did all this because I heard a name whispered on the wind. Utnapishtim, the one who escaped the fate of men, the one who lives forever. So I ask you, Utnapishtim the faraway, how did you join the assembly of the gods? How did you find the eternal life that I now seek? Because I cannot. I will not lie down and become clay like my brother Enkidu. Utnapishtim listened, his ancient eyes holding a deep, profound sadness. He had seen 1,000 generations rise and fall. He had seen empires turn to sand. The desperate plea of a mortal king was a story he knew all too well. He finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, like a river that has flowed for ages. Gilgamesh, your quest is born of love, but it is a fool's errand. You rage against the very fabric of the world. Do we build a house to stand forever? Do we sign a contract to be valid for all time? Does a river, when it floods, maintain its high water for eternity? No. From the moment we are born, we are shadowed by our end. The gods themselves decreed it. When they created mankind, they allotted death to mankind, but they kept life for themselves. There is the sleeping man and there is the dead man. Do they not look the same? Life is a fragile, beautiful thing, precisely because it does not last. The gods have drawn a line and you are trying to erase it. My fate, Gilgamesh, was different. It was a singular event, a secret of the gods that was never meant to be repeated. But you have traveled so far, and your heart is so heavy. So I will tell you this secret. I will tell you the story of the great flood. Gilgamesh leaned forward, every fiber of his being focused on the old man's words. This was it, the answer. Long ago, Utnapishtim began, I lived in the city of Shuruppak. You would have loved it, Gilgamesh. It was a beautiful city, bustling and alive, resting on the banks of the mighty Euphrates River. I was a king there, just as you are in Uruk. But the world was different then. It was loud. Humanity had multiplied, and the noise we made, our clamor, our ceaseless activity, it echoed all the way up to the heavens. And it disturbed the sleep of the great god, Enlil, the lord of wind, earth, and air. He grew irritable, then angry. He listened to the cacophony of humanity and said to the other gods, the noise of mankind has become too much. I can no longer get any rest. And so in his fury, Enlil convinced the council of the gods to do the unthinkable, to wipe the slate clean, to send a great flood to destroy every living thing on the face of the earth. All the great gods swore an oath of secrecy, an oath to let humanity perish, unaware of the doom that was coming. But one god, the cleverest of them all, the god of wisdom and water, had a soft spot for mankind. He had been my patron god. He was bound by his oath and could not speak to me directly, but wisdom always finds a way. One night, as I slept in my reed hut by the river, I heard a voice. It wasn't speaking to me, not exactly. It was speaking to my house. I heard it whisper, reed hut, wall oh wall. Listen, reed hut, and pay attention, wall. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubertutu, tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon your possessions and save your life. Take aboard the boat the seed of all living things. My blood ran cold. It was the voice of Ea. He was using my own home as a loophole to warn me. He then gave me the precise dimensions of the vessel he wanted me to build. It was to be a perfect cube, its length, width, and height all equal. It was to have 7 decks, each divided into 9 sections. And it was to be sealed inside and out with bitumen and pitch. I was terrified, but I understood. I asked the voice, "My lord, what shall I tell the elders and the people of my city when they see me building such a thing?" In his infinite cleverness, gave me the perfect lie. He told me, "Tell them this. I have learned that the great god Enlil is furious with me, Utnapishtim. Therefore, I can no longer live in his lands or set foot in his city. I must go down to the Apsu, the great freshwater ocean that lies beneath the earth, to live with my lord Ea. But once I am gone, Enlil's anger will be appeased, and he will shower you, the people of Shuruppak, with a rain of riches, birds and fish in abundance, a bountiful harvest, a feast of plenty." It was a cruel and brilliant deception. The next morning, I gathered the people and told them the lie, and they believed me. In their hope for future riches, they helped me build the instrument of my salvation and their doom. The craftsmen, the carpenters, the reed weavers, the whole city worked. The children carried the pitch. The poor and the rich alike brought what they could. For 5 days we built the frame. On the 6th I laid the planking. By the 7th day, the great boat was finished. It was a massive, clumsy-looking cube of a thing, but it was strong. We launched it, and it was so heavy it was 2/3 submerged. Then I began to load it. I put all of my gold and silver aboard. I loaded the seed of all living things, the beasts of the field and the wild creatures of the steppe. I brought my entire family, my kin, and all the craftsmen who had helped me, the boat builders, the sealers, everyone with a skill that might be needed to start the world anew. Then it gave me a final chilling instruction. When the time is right, go into the boat and seal the door. I watched the sky. That evening, the one who orders the darkness sent a terrifying, unnatural rain. I saw the weather and I was afraid. I went aboard and sealed the door behind me, handing over the navigation of my great house to the boatman, Pusera Murray. As the first light of dawn broke, a black cloud rose from the horizon. Inside it, Adad, the god of storms, thundered. The gods of the abyss rose up. The god of plague set loose the whirlwinds. The dams of the deep were broken, and the land was shattered like a pot. For 1 full day, the storm wind blew, gathering speed as it blew, submerging the mountains, and overtaking the people like a battle. No one could see his brother. The people could not be recognized from the heavens. The destruction was so total, so terrifying, that even the gods who had ordered it were afraid. They retreated to the highest heaven of Anu, and they cowered. They huddled together like wet dogs. The goddess Ishtar, the mother of all living, cried out like a woman in childbirth, her beautiful voice filled with anguish. "How could I have commanded this evil in the council of the gods? I have allowed my people to be destroyed. They fill the sea now like so many fish." For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind blew, and the flood storm swept over the land. The world was annihilated. All of humanity had been turned back into clay. And I, Utnapishtim, was sealed in my box of wood and pitch, listening to the screams of a dying world. When the 7th day dawned, the sea grew calm. The storm was over. The deluge was finished. I opened a hatch and light fell on my face. I looked out at the world and all I could see was water. The landscape was level as a flat roof. There was no coast, no mountain, no tree. Just a silent, endless ocean where the world used to be. I fell to my knees and wept. Tears streamed down my face because there was nothing else. All of humanity was gone, returned to the primordial clay from which the gods had first shaped them. The world I knew, the cities, the people, the very noise of life. It had all been washed away, and in its place was a terrible, profound silence. My ship drifted for days. We were a single speck of life in a dead world. Every direction was the same, a horizon of gray water meeting a gray sky. There was no sign of land, no hope of it. The earth had become the sea. After an unknown time I saw it, the peak of a mountain, piercing the surface of the water like the tip of a spear. It was Mount Nizur. The great boat ran aground, and the mountain held it fast. For 7 days we remained lodged there, on the peak of a drowned world, waiting. On the 7th day, I decided to see if the waters had receded elsewhere. I took out a dove and set it free. The dove flew away, but it could find no place to land, no perch for its feet, and so it returned to the ship. Then I took out a swallow and set it free. The swallow flew away, but like the dove, it found no resting place, and it too returned. Finally I took out a raven. I set it free. The raven flew away, and it saw that the waters were receding. It found food. It circled, it cawed, but it did not return to me. The world was ready to be born again. I opened all the doors and windows, letting the wind and light pour in. I stepped out onto the mountain. I set my family, my craftsmen, and all the animals free upon the new earth. Then I prepared a sacrifice. I set up 7 sacred vessels and then 7 more. Underneath them, I heaped cane and cedar and myrtle. I was giving thanks. Thanks for my life, thanks for the lives of my family. But I was also making an offering to gods who I wasn't even sure were still there. And then a scent rose to the heavens, the sweet savor of the burning cedar and myrtle. And the gods smelled it. And they gathered like flies around the sacrifice. You must understand, Gilgamesh. Without humanity to make offerings, the gods were starving. They descended from the heavens, desperate for the smoke of my fire. Ishtar, the great goddess of love and war, she who had wept for humanity's destruction, she arrived, lifting her magnificent necklace of fly jewels. She swore an oath. O gods, as surely as I shall not forget this lapis lazuli necklace at my throat, I shall ever remember these days and never forget them. Let all the gods come to the offering, but let Enlil not come. For he, without reason, brought forth the flood and consigned my people to destruction. Just then Enlil himself arrived, the lord of wind and storm, the king of the gods who had ordered the annihilation of man. When he saw the boat, his fury was absolute. He was incandescent with rage. He turned to the other gods, his voice shaking the mountain. Has some living thing escaped? No man was to survive the destruction. Who could stand against his fury? The heavens themselves trembled. But then another god, the clever Ea, the very one who had warned me in a dream, he stepped forward. He did not shrink from Enlil's rage. He spoke, his voice calm but sharp with righteous anger. You warrior, wisest among the gods, how could you so senselessly bring forth a flood? It was not wise. It was not just. I looked Enlil in the eye. On the sinner lay his sin. On the transgressor lay his transgression. But be merciful, so that he may not be cut off. Be patient, so that he may not be utterly destroyed. Instead of unleashing a flood, you could have sent a lion to diminish mankind. Instead of a flood, you could have sent a wolf. Instead of a flood, a famine could have laid waste to the land. Instead of a flood, a plague could have been sent. A's words were a mirror, forcing Enlil to see the grotesque scale of his own actions. It was not I who revealed the secret of the great gods, Ye continued. I only let the most wise man, Utnapishtim, see a dream, and in that way, he understood the secret. He was clever enough to unravel the warning. Enlil was silent. The fury drained from him, replaced by something else. Shame perhaps. Or maybe for the first time he understood the consequence of what he had done. He had acted like a spoiled child, breaking his favorite toy in a fit of pique, only to be left alone in the silence of his own creation. He boarded my ship. He stood before me, the man who had survived his apocalypse. He took my hand and the hand of my wife and had us kneel. He stood between us and touched our foreheads in a blessing. And he spoke, his voice no longer filled with rage, but with a strange, solemn finality. Hitherto, Utnapishtim has been a man. But now, Utnapishtim and his wife shall be like us, the gods. They shall live far away, at the mouth of the rivers. And so it was. They took us away to live at the ends of the earth, here in this place, and gave us the one thing the gods have that mortals do not, eternal life. They made me an immortal Gilgamesh, not as a reward for my virtue, but as an apology for their mistake. My immortality is a monument to their guilt. That is my story. That is how I escaped the great flood and cheated death. It was not my strength, not my wisdom. It was the whim of one god betraying the secret of another. It was luck, a roll of the celestial dice. So now I look at you, Gilgamesh, you who have crossed the waters of death and traveled to the edge of the world to find me. I was granted eternal life by the assembly of the gods themselves, in the aftermath of the world's end. But now for you, who will summon the gods into assembly? Who will argue on your behalf, so that you might find this life that you are seeking? Come, Gilgamesh, let us put your claim to the test. If you truly wish to conquer death, you must first conquer its brother, sleep. Prevail against sleep for 6 days and 7 nights, and then we shall see if you are worthy of the gods' assembly. Sit, stay awake, prove your mettle." And so Gilgamesh, the weary traveler, the exhausted king, sat down upon the shore of the faraway land. The winds that had carried him across the waters of death now whispered a soft lullaby. The waves lapped gently against the sand, a steady, hypnotic rhythm. His eyelids, heavy as stone, began to droop. He had battled demons, crossed mountains, and stared into the abyss. But the simple human need for rest was a foe unlike any other. A mist of sleep, like a fog rolling in from the sea, enveloped him, and he fell. He slept deeply and completely as soon as he had sat down. Utnapishtim looked upon the sleeping king with a knowing, almost sorrowful gaze. He turned to his wife. "Look at this strong man who desires eternal life," he said. "Sleep like a storm cloud has overwhelmed him." His wife, full of compassion for the traveler who had journeyed so far, replied, "Touch him so he may awaken. Let him return safely on the path he traveled." But Utnapishtim had a lesson to teach. A lesson not of cruelty but of truth. "Mankind is deceptive," he said. "He will try to deceive you. Watch. We will not wake him. Instead, bake a loaf of bread for him each day he sleeps. Place it by his head and mark the wall for every day that passes." And so she did. On the first day, she baked a loaf and set it by his head. His bread was hard and dry. On the second day, she baked another. That loaf was leathery. The third was soggy. The fourth loaf had white specks of mold blooming across its crust. The fifth was gray with age. The sixth was rotten, a dark, putrid brown. And when she went to place the seventh loaf, Utnapishtim stopped her. He touched the sleeping king. Gilgamesh awoke with a jolt. He looked at Utnapishtim, his mind still clouded. "The moment sleep poured over me," he said. "You touched me and I awoke." Utnapishtim simply pointed. "Gilgamesh, look at your bread. Count your loaves. 1 day, 2 days, 7 days you have slept." He showed him the first loaf dry as dust, the second ruined, the third spoiled. Gilgamesh stared in horror at the physical proof of his failure, a timeline of his own weakness laid out before him. The truth was undeniable. He who had wrestled the bull of heaven had been defeated by a nap. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. He cried out, "What shall I do, Utnapishtim? Where shall I go? The snatcher has taken hold of my flesh. In the very chamber where I sleep, death resides. And wherever I set my foot, there too is death." He had come to the end of the world to escape his mortality, only to have it proven to him in the most humbling way imaginable. He was not a god. He was a man. And man must sleep. And man must die. Seeing his utter desolation, Utnapishtim's wife again took pity on the king. She whispered to her husband, "Gilgamesh came here weary and strained. What will you give him for his journey home?" And Utnapishtim, perhaps moved by the king's broken spirit, decided to reveal one final secret. A consolation prize. Not eternal life but the next best thing. He spoke to Gilgamesh. "You are weary. You have gained nothing for your troubles. But I will tell you a hidden thing, a secret of the gods. There is a plant that grows deep beneath the waters. It is like a thorny bramble, and its thorns will prick your hands. But if you can succeed in bringing this plant to the surface, it will restore your lost youth. It will make an old man young again." A spark of hope ignited in Gilgamesh's eyes. This was it, a second chance. He could not live forever, but he could live his life again. He could return to Uruk in the prime of his strength. He tied heavy stones to his feet, and they pulled him down into the abyss, the deep waters where the plant grew. He saw it, its thorns gleaming. He grabbed it, ignoring the searing pain as it tore at his hands. Kicking free of the stones, he rose to the surface, gasping for air, clutching the prize. He showed it to the ferryman, Shinabi. "Look," he proclaimed. "This is the plant of heartbeat. With it, a man can regain his vigor. I will carry it back to Uruk, to my city. I will give it to the old men to eat, and they will be young again. And then I will eat it myself, and return to the days of my youth." His spirit renewed, they began the long journey home. After many days, they stopped for the night. Gilgamesh saw a pool of cool, inviting water and decided to bathe. He placed the precious, thorny plant on the bank and waded into the pool. But he was not alone. A serpent, drawn by the plant's sweet fragrance, slithered silently from its hole. It snatched the plant in its jaws and carried it away. As it moved, the serpent shed its old, wrinkled skin, leaving it on the ground, and emerged renewed, young and vibrant. Gilgamesh finished his bath and returned to the shore. The plant was gone. He saw the shed skin of the snake and he understood. He fell to his knees and wept, the tears streaming down his face. He had held the secret to youth in his very hands, and lost it to a snake. "For whom have my hands toiled, Urshanabi?" he cried. "For whom has my heart's blood been spent? I have gained nothing for myself. I have only done a good turn for the lion of the earth." He had nothing. The quest was over. He had failed to gain immortality. He had failed to regain his youth. Defeated, empty-handed, and utterly mortal, he journeyed the rest of the way back to Uruk. As he and the ferryman approached the great city, Gilgamesh looked up, and he saw them, the walls, the massive sun-baked brick walls of his kingdom, the foundation of Eanna, the holy temple. He stopped, and a profound stillness came over him. He turned to Urshanabi, but his voice was different. The desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady pride. "Go up, Urshanabi," he said. "Walk on the walls of Uruk. Inspect the foundation platform, touch the brickwork. Is it not of burnt brick and good? Did not the 7 sages themselves lay its foundations? One part is city, one part is orchards, one part is clay pits. 3 parts and the temple precinct of Ishtar make up Uruk." In that moment, Gilgamesh finally understood. He looked at the work of his hands, the city he had built, the legacy that would outlive him by thousands of years. He would die. His body would fail. But these walls would stand. The stories of his journey, of his friendship with Enkidu, of his battle with Humbaba, of his quest for eternal life. These would be told. They would be written down on clay tablets and preserved in the library of his great city. His immortality was not in his body. It was in his story. It was in his legacy. It was in the civilization he had helped to build. This was the only immortality a human being could ever hope to achieve. Not by escaping death, but by creating something that death cannot touch. And so the story of Gilgamesh, the first hero of literature, concludes. It is a story that echoes through the ages. The tale of the Great Flood, told 1,000 years before the Bible, shows us how ancient cultures wrestled with the same fears of divine wrath and ultimate destruction. The serpent that steals the gift of rejuvenation is a shadow of the one we find in another sacred garden. But the ultimate lesson of Gilgamesh is more personal. It's the journey from tyranny to friendship, from arrogance to wisdom, from the frantic fear of death to the quiet acceptance of our mortal legacy. Gilgamesh sought to live forever, but learned that the true measure of a life is not in its length, but in its depth. It's what we build, what we create, and the stories we leave behind for others to tell. He forces us to ask ourselves, what are the walls of our Uruk? What are we building that will last beyond our own brief time on this earth?